It's been 5 years since a pregnant 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore was discovered deceased in her apartment. And regardless of mounting evidence to the contrary, this entire time her manner of death has been ruled as self-inflicted. There are 5 possible manners of death: accidental, natural, homicide, self-inflicted, which has a real term that I can't really use on this app, and undetermined. But the Massachusetts Office of the Chief Medical Examiner has changed Sandra Birchmore's manner of death from self-inflicted to undetermined. And also her cause of death has been changed from asphyxiation by hanging to simply asphyxiation. And this is incredibly important because the federal government alleges that Matthew Farwell killed Sandra Birchmore to cover a bunch of other crimes he was doing and then staged it to look like she did it to herself. I'm going to talk about some sensitive stuff in this video, including death of a pregnant woman, child abuse, and coercion, violence. Please only watch this if you can do so safely. As of right now, Farwell is scheduled to stand trial for Sandra Birchmore's death and the death of her unborn child later this year. And at the end of March, he filed a motion asking to be released from prison until the trial. And a lot of his arguments seem to rely on this ruling by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And I'm going to talk about why the Massachusetts Office of the Chief Medical Examiner should have known better, in my opinion, and should have changed this determination way sooner, starting with the numerous text messages from Farwell about choking Sandra. On at least 20 occasions in just the year before her death, Farwell sent Birchmore messages stating that he would grab her throat, pin her down by her throat, squeeze her throat, or choke her during sexual activity. He reflected on how tight he should squeeze, texting that he wanted her to feel like, oh my god, this is really happening and I can't stop it. The Massachusetts State Police had his phone extraction. They had the ability to see this stuff. On his iCloud account, there were images that confirmed his interest in domestic and sexual violence, including strangulation. One image states, when she says, "Choke me, daddy," and you get carried away, and now she's dead. Also, a screenshot of a woman saying that she could not sleep, followed by a man choking her, saying, "Good night, B-word." He initiated the concept of choking Birchmore on numerous occasions, and based on a review of her journal entries, as early as 2013, when she was just 16 years old, he introduced the idea of choking during their sexual encounters and discussions. Reminder, when all of this began, he was 27 and she was 15, and he was in a position of authority over her because he worked for the Stoughton Police Department and she had joined their Young Police Explorers program when she was 13. Also, she was 4'10", he is 6'4". Leading up to Sandra's death, there is evidence that Farwell asked for a key to her apartment, that he inspected the closet door from which Sandra Birchmore was found hanging, and Sandra's phone locks for the final time just after Farwell texts her that he's arriving at the apartment. And as of now, there's DNA evidence directly connecting Farwell to this crime. His semen was found in multiple spots inside of her underwear, though he had told the police that the last time they had sex was 4 months prior. And also his DNA was on the ligature that was found around her neck, which was a strap from a duffel bag. But Dr. Smock, who is the pathologist for the federal government, says this is a homicide. And Dr. Smock basically agrees with Dr. Bodden, who is the forensic pathologist that was hired by Sandra Birchmore's family. Both of them talk about the hyoid bone fracture in her neck. Essentially, the logic is that this bone breaks way more typically in a strangulation than it would in the type of hanging that Sandra is accused of, which is a seated position as opposed to standing. There was also this pattern imprint injury on her chest. This is the buckle mark on her right clavicle. An imprint or indentation matched this buckle that ended up being on the strap behind her head. And there's no explanation for how the buckle could have gotten from the front to the back unless she was repositioned. Sandra also had abrasions on her nose. These types of injuries are commonly seen in cases of suffocation when the victim moves their nose back and forth in an effort to breathe. She had skin missing from the inferior and lateral aspects of her nose. Also, a pink flamingo necklace that Sandra frequently wore was found broken and dangling on her, which would indicate the presence of a struggle. Farwell tries to argue that Sandra had a history of mental health stuff going on, and she was seeing a therapist and she was prescribed antidepressants. But her therapist saw Sandra the day before she died and said there was no red flags that day. And also, Sandra's 2 cats were found in her apartment the day that she was discovered 3 days after her death. This is deeply circumstantial and speculative, and this is my opinion. The idea that she would leave the cats alone adds an extra layer of doubt for me. Also, Matthew Farwell had crazy motive to do these crimes. A witness had called the Stoughton Police Department, spoke to one of his colleagues, and was like, "Do you know that Matthew Farwell is hooking up with Sandra Birchmore?" And that colleague, instead of reporting it, called Farwell to let him know. Also, Sandra was presenting Farwell ultimatums. She found out that Farwell's wife was pregnant, and she was like, "You need to agree to engage in unprotected sex with me to conceive a child. And in return, I won't tell anybody about us." About 4 months before her death, Birchmore prepared a draft text message to Farwell's wife, and she sent this to one of her friends. It said in part, "I'm just messaging to inform you that your husband Matthew has been cheating on you since before you guys were even married. And here's some text with Sandra and Matthew where she's saying, I won't talk shit about you or your kids. That way we both get what we want. And he's like, okay, this is an in-person discussion. And here they are texting about the baby. She's saying, I'm 3.5 weeks. We're keeping this kid. And their birth certificate is being signed or hers isn't. Farwell's wife is pregnant and Sandra's basically like, look, I'm going to tell her if you don't do what I want. You mad she's due in February and I am in September and you don't know how you're going to be there for both of us. Pause to read if you want. And Farwell's like, you have threatened me from the word go. If I didn't go and give you what you wanted, you would ruin me. And of course, there's security footage of Farwell entering Sandra's apartment right around the time that her phone stops moving for the very last time. Within approximately 13 hours of Farwell's visit to Birchmore's apartment on February 1st, his wife gave birth to their third child at the hospital. Unless this was a scheduled C-section, I think it's very likely that his wife was in labor when Matthew Farwell allegedly went to kill Sandra Birchmore. So to me, there was plenty of evidence to know that this was not self-inflicted. And any more recent evidence that might have changed their mind was evidence they could have found at the time. As an example, about 3 months after Sandra died in May of 2021, the Massachusetts State Police was aware that there was DNA on multiple items, including semen in Sandra Birchmore's underwear. And instead of compelling a DNA swab from Matthew Farwell, who was in her apartment the last time her cell phone moved, they were like, let's just take him at his word. He didn't have sex with her after October of last year. This is crazy. No normal civilian would ever experience a privilege like that, of just being taken at face value, and ultimately it was a lie. The DNA belonged to him. I know at least one of you is going to ask if this means that Massachusetts is going to prosecute Farwell. I certainly would not hold my breath. However, in terms of like double jeopardy, there is this thing called the dual sovereignty doctrine, which basically says two different governments can charge somebody with crimes from the same evidence. It's possible they could charge him. The track record isn't great. I don't think that there is a legal reason that an autopsy would ever stop a specific kind of prosecution, even if the cause or manner didn't like necessarily line up with the theory of the case. But it would be much harder to convince a jury that your own state's like medical examiner disagreed with you. In short, can they charge him? Yes. Will they charge him? Probably not. The court has not yet ruled on whether Farwell will be released from detention. I really doubt it. I doubted it before this news. I doubt it more now. In fact, I think he might have to amend his motion because it's so heavily reliant on something that is no longer true. That's everything I know about this for now. Love you guys. Drink water. Bye.